Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau yesterday testifying before the Foreign Election Interference Commission made a stunning admission. He said at the time referenced to September of 2023 when he stood up in the Canadian Parliament and for the very first time made those stunning allegations of Indian agents being behind the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Khalistani separatist and a terrorist. Yesterday, he qualified what he said back in September of 2023 by saying that at that time, there was no hard evidentiary proof. It was just intel or intelligence. But at the time, the exact phrase that was used by Mr. Trudeau when he stood in Parliament in September of 2023 was there were credible allegations of links between Indian government agents and the death of a Canadian national named Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, the question that needs to be asked is, when did credible allegations, the phrase that Mr. Trudeau used first on the floor of the Canadian Parliament, when did that become just intel? Why did he have to qualify in his testimony yesterday before the Foreign Election Interference Commission that it was not hard evidentiary proof, it was just intel? And in this year gone by, or year and a little over a year, where is the proof that Indian agents were involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar? In fact, shouldn't this be produced in a court of law by now? Shouldn't this have already been produced in a court of law by now? There are 4 individuals who have been arrested in the month of May for the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. They are awaiting trial. There have been 5 adjournments in this case. 4 of those adjournments have been sought for by the prosecution service because they have to still go through the process of document collection and evidence collection. So if they have not made this evidence public in a court of law, a year and plus since the killing of Hardeep Nijjar and a year and plus since Mr. Trudeau stood up in Parliament and said there were credible allegations, then where is the proof? First the story, and then we'll go across to our guests.
Over the past number of weeks, Canadian security agencies have been actively pursuing credible allegations of a potential link between agents of the government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
At that point, it was primarily intelligence, not hard evidentiary proof. So we said, well, let's work together and look into your security services and maybe we can get that done. No, we're not doing that.
There is a pattern. The pattern is motivated by political considerations on the part of the Canadian Trudeau government. There is a clear pattern to smear India.
ਕਿਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਵੀ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਿਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਖਰਾਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ। ਸਾਡੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਰਿਸ਼ਤਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਧਾਰੇ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਰੋਜ਼ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਹੁਣ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ।
कनाडा को चाहिए कि वो जो भी आतंकवादी उनके यहाँ पनाह लिए हुए हैं उनको वो भारत को सुपुर्द करें ताकि भारत के कानून के अनुसार उनके साथ यथोचित कार्रवाई की जा सके।
All right, let's open this up to our guest. Michael Kugelman is director with the South Asia Institute of the Woodrow Wilson Centre. Vivek Karju, former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Anish Farooqi is a Canadian journalist. R.P. Singh is spokesperson of the BJP. Mr. Singh, let me start with you. The Canadian government's contention is, and this is what the Canadian Prime Minister said, that at the time that he made the statement, it was intel, it was not hard evidentiary proof, and the onus was on the government of India to act on that intel and discover the evidence of quote-unquote potential links between Indian government agents and the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Well, anyone can say that I have intelligence, intel with us. I can say today, I can claim today that I have intel today that Justin Trudeau is doing it on behalf of certain terrorist organizations because they'll fund them in the elections. Where is the evidence? Your allegations, intel doesn't serve as evidence. So you need to come with a hard, concrete evidence. And this is known in the Canadian circle that he is catering to a particular vote bank because the Jagmeet Singh group has withdrawn support from him. And now he need to target that vote bank, not because of vote bank. They are hardly 2% as a vote bank, but because of the huge money they fund in elections. So, and is known to everyone in Canada, known to any businessman or any corporate or any media house in Canada. But fact is that what are they trying to do? They are trying to keep snakes at their backyard. I remember Hillary Clinton saying to Pakistan that if you have snakes in your backyard, ultimately they're going to come and bite you. It's not Justin Trudeau. He is there today. He might not be there after next election. It is the Canadians who will suffer because of this terrorist. Because already there are gangsters operating from their land. They are already blackmailing. They are already extorting money from the businessman there in Canada also.
So let me ask Anish Faruqi, on the 18th of September 2023, when Prime Minister Trudeau stood up in the Canadian Parliament, he said, and I quote, "There are credible allegations of potential links between Government of India officials and the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Canadian national on Canadian soil." Yesterday, while deposing before the Foreign Election Interference Commission, he said it was primarily intelligence, not hard evidentiary proof. That seems like a climb down. Why did he go from credible allegations to not hard evidentiary proof?
Well, to the surprise of all the Canadians, yes, indeed, it is a change in his stance of Mr. Trudeau. However, it does not change the fact, as my friend Mr. Singh said, that anyone can stand and start blaming. It's a matter of two states, two close states like India and Canada have good relationship, trade and bilateral cooperation. So I don't think it's just anyone. It is the Prime Minister of Canada. It's the head of a state giving a statement of allegation based on certain intel or some evidences that were provided to him by the CSIS and the RCMP, and the investigation is still open and it's still going on. So we still have to see, as you said, the hard evidence. Yes, we are interested to see that. Even the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, wants to see that, and he wants access to that information. So in a way, I agree with you, but then you know what? There is something. It's not that there's nothing happened. It did happen. There was a murder happened on the soil of Canada of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He may be wanted in India, but he is a citizen of Canada, and Canada will protect all its citizens regardless of their ethnicity.
No, but Mr. Faruqi, nobody has a problem with that. The problem is the Prime Minister of a country very rarely stands up in a parliament and accuses a fellow country, a friend, a partner, and more importantly, a fellow democracy, and said credible allegations of links of Indian agents in the murder of a Canadian national. And then for the last year plus, he made this allegation in September of 2023. For the last 1 year, India has been asking him both privately and publicly, show us the evidence. And he has not shown the evidence. And including, and in his own words yesterday, it was not evidence, it was primarily intel. Why should India, or for that matter, any non-partisan observer who's watching this India-Canada saga over the last year, take the words of the Canadian Prime Minister seriously?
No, I agree. It's a big question mark. But again, as I said, like when Justin Trudeau met Modi Saab in the summit, he did mention that we do have these links. Would you be cooperating with us so we can jointly investigate these things? And there was no cooperation from Indian side, so that raises up many eyebrows. That why?
Okay, let's take that at face value, right? Let's take that at face value, assuming that what Mr. Trudeau said is right, that he met the Prime Minister last Friday in Laos, and he said, this is what we have on you, and assuming that the Prime Minister was right when he said the Indian side is not cooperating, go ahead, make it public, let the world know.
Yeah, but again, like why is India not cooperating? Like that is another big question mark for Canadians, right?
My point is that's one person's word against another. Let's test it out. Let's put it out in the public domain and say this is the evidence that we have. Why is the Canadian government not doing that?
You see, it is really unprecedented that the High Commissioner and their 6 officials were expelled from Canada. It is like it never happened. It's not an easy thing to do for any state.
Because the Canadian police wanted to make them persons of interest in an ongoing murder investigation and wanted the government of India to waive off their diplomatic immunity. No government would do that. Let me ask Vivek Kaju. Let me ask Vivek
Canadian
Kaju.
police is not controlled by Justin Trudeau, right?
He's been a career diplomat. If the Indian government had approached the Canadian government and said that, look, there are 6 of your diplomats here who we want to add in an FIR as suspects in a murder investigation, please waive off their diplomatic immunity, what do you think the government of Canada would have said or done, Mr. Kaju?
Well, that the Canadians asking us to waive diplomatic immunity of 6 diplomats, including the High Commissioner, was simply propaganda. In fact, in his evidence before this Foreign Interference Committee, Trudeau himself said that if the Canadians were asked to do this, they would not do it. So this was a stupid thing. But Zaka, allow me to make a couple of points. The first point is that there is a fundamental difference between intelligence and evidence that can be produced and will stand up in a court of law. Now, what the Canadians asked us to do was something quite unprecedented. And Trudeau said this today, that he asked us to be given access to our intelligence agency so that there could be some kind of a joint investigation carried out. No country would do this. Will Canada allow its intelligence agency to be opened up to scrutiny by another country? Of course not. Second, and this is the important thing, that Canada has raised this matter to a political level by naming a senior minister of the government as being involved in this. Now, this is something that is never done. And Canada knows that this is wrong because ministers of the government and indeed of other countries don't involve themselves in operational matters. So from an intelligence and diplomatic level spat, this has been taken to the political level. Okay. And once these spats, allow me just one moment, when these are taken to that level, it becomes extremely difficult to resolve. Finally, you mentioned in your opening remarks that there is 4 Indians have been arrested in the matters relating to Nijjar, and we'll have, at some stage, the Canadian prosecutors will have to take the matter to court and prosecute these people by charge sheeting them, producing evidence, etc. At that stage, we will come to a bridge that we will have to cross. If there is something valid, if the Canadian legal courts say that yes, there is something that these 4 gentlemen, 4 persons who've been indicted and charge sheeted have to answer.
Okay.
That stage still hasn't reached. So till now, we are absolutely right in saying that that Trudeau has jumped the gun. Trudeau has asked for things that are simply wrong. And as for the 5 eyes, they are allies. They will stand with the Canadians no matter what. And lastly, there is a fundamental distinction between the American case involving Pannun and the Nijjar case. Because in the Pannun case, the matter has moved to the courts.
Correct.
Here there's nothing in the courts.
Nothing has come out in the courts. Let me ask Michael Kugelman, the distinction between the US case and the Canadian case. Of course, in the US case, it was a threat to the life of an individual, whereas in the Canadian case, that threat came good. But Michael Kugelman, the concern here in India is Justin Trudeau clearly could not have taken such a drastic step to start with in September of last year, and then, of course, yesterday what he said before the Election Interference Commission, to publicly attack an elected government of a fellow democracy unless he got a sign-off of some form from the United States. We know that the initial intel, and this was come out subsequently in reporting, was provided by one of the Five Eyes allies. It's easy to guess which one that is. Even the RCMP, when they had their press conference earlier this week, they said, yes, the FBI is helping us in the investigation. So the question is, if this is being done with the support of the US government, the White House, the State Department, why are they doing this to a strategic partner? Why is this happening publicly to a country which avowedly is, your answer, your counterweight to China?
Well, a few things here, Zaka. First of all, from a U.S. perspective, India is a strategic partner. Canada is a close ally. And that means that the U.S. is absolutely going to back its Canadian ally in terms of what it does. I'm not sure that the U.S. actually had talked to the Canadian government about when Trudeau would come out with the allegation that he did last year, or even if he should. But clearly the U.S. is going to be working with and expressing solidarity with its closest allies, including Canada. And I would actually argue that the U.S. has kept in mind, despite that, its strategic partnership with India by proceeding very differently than Canada has in terms of how it's engaged with India regarding its own very serious allegations at its level against Canada. As you know, there's been a significant difference. The U.S., unlike Canada, has not really gone public in a big way about its allegations against India. In fact, the Biden administration didn't really say much at all until an indictment was unsealed last year, which laid out in considerable detail what I would describe as evidence to back up the U.S. allegations. But of course, in Canada, it's been very different, as we've discussed, that the Canadian government has been very public from a very early point about its allegations without providing evidence in the public sphere. But I don't think the US
what's your best guess for why he did that? Your best guess is this was just Trudeau going out on a limb?
Well, I mean, I think that the official position from Canada, which I would think would have some truth to it, is that it was really about public security. I think that the Canadian government was concerned that if it didn't go public with these allegations when it did, then it risked threats to Canadian lives. Essentially, the Canadian government hoped that by bringing out these allegations publicly, that it could disrupt possible future activities or threats to members of the Sikh community, Canadian citizens. I think that's part of it. There's various possibilities, but I do think that public security issue is something that should not be dismissed in this discussion.
So very quickly, how do you see this playing out over the next, let's say, till between now and whenever the next U.S. president takes office?
Right. I mean, it's hard to know what the next administration would do, but I think that the goal would be the same. That there's bipartisan support in the U.S., regardless of who wins the election. That Canada is a key ally and India is a key strategic partner. So I think that the U.S., regardless of who wins the election, will continue to balance that critical partnership, critical alliance with Canada, help it express solidarity, but also be very careful about how it engages with India regarding its own allegations against India. So I expect that we'll see continuity.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests. We need to go to a special interview right after this. Thank you. All right, I want to go across now to Mr. Ward Elcock. He's the former director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and former Deputy Minister for National Defence. Thank you very much, Mr. Elcock. Yesterday, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, testifying before the Foreign Election Interference Commission, said that when he spoke in September of 2023, for the first time, he made the public allegations against the Government of India and Government of India officials being involved in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Yesterday, he qualified that by saying, at that time, it was not hard evidentiary proof, it was simply intel. Do you think, in light of what he said yesterday, he jumped the gun back in September 2023?
No, not at all. Frankly, the intelligence seemed pretty firm, and intelligence does allow governments to take decisions, even if sometimes it is not absolutely perfect.
But wouldn't you make the case that if particularly you go public, and it's not just anyone who's going public, it's the Prime Minister of a country going public from the floor of the Parliament of that country, it has to have some evidentiary basis or some value as hard proof?
Depends on how good your intelligence is. If you have very solid intelligence, and in this case they appear to have believed that they did, and it seems to have been borne out, given the fact that the RCMP have now actually leveled charges on the basis of some of that original information, I think the government's actions are borne out as being entirely appropriate.
Why would Trudeau then qualify that by saying what he said yesterday, that at that time it did not have hard evidentiary value, it was just intel?
At the time they said it was intelligence. At the time they didn't say it was evidence. They said it was intelligence.
What has changed
now? That
now?
hasn't changed.
Yeah, exactly. That hasn't changed and it hasn't changed in the last 1 year either, because the Government of India even today is saying that in the last 1 year, they have not got any proof from the Canadian side.
Well, the government of India is saying that it doesn't have any proof. There was a meeting in Singapore at which some evidence was offered to the government of India. That doesn't appear to be sufficient for the government of India. However, the RCMP is now embarked on 20 or 30 charges. So there will, in fact, be prosecutions, and there will, in fact, be evidence brought forward, some of which will almost certainly suggest that there were links with Indian diplomats in Canada.
Let's talk about the Nijjar killing. The 4 individuals have been arrested in connection with that. The trial has not even started. No documents have been produced in court, which, as you say, would be evidence, and that evidence should be sufficient enough to stand in a court of law. The trial's not even begun. It's been over a year since Mr. Trudeau made those allegations. So why, if the Canadians have the evidence, is it not being produced in a court of law?
That's not the way it works in our system until they have actually a court date for the actual prosecution for the actual court case. The RCMP is not going to provide the evidence to the public. It will only be provided in the course of the trial itself. So until the trial actually starts, we won't see any of the evidence. Once the trial has started, we will begin to see evidence on a regular basis, I suspect. And particularly if one of the defendants or some of the defendants in that case or other cases flip, then we will probably get more evidence.
But since May of this year, Mr. Elcock, this case has been adjourned 5 times. 4 out of those 5 times, it was the Crown Prosecution Services who asked for the adjournment. If they have the evidence, why are they asking for adjournments?
That's neither here nor there, but that's not unusual in a criminal prosecution. May relate to the fact that they are still looking for more evidence, or that they are collecting more evidence, or they have more evidence available, or have to interview additional witnesses. It can indicate a number of things.
One of the things
but it's not unusual.
One of the things that the government of India has repeatedly stressed is, if there is the evidence, it's not been produced in a court of law, and the government of India, as you said, is unwilling to investigate this, why not make that public?
Because that's not the way trials work. They may work that way in India, but in Canada they don't work that way. The evidence is produced at trial. To produce the evidence before the trial would endanger a conviction at the trial.
But it's okay for the Prime Minister of a country to stand up in Parliament and make allegations, very serious allegations, against a fellow democracy.
The reason... Pardon me, he originally stood up on the basis of intelligence. The comments that he's made since then basically are around the decision of the RCMP, not only to indicate that it is proceeding with charges, but also to proceed to, if you will, cut off the head of the snake, so to speak, and because the Indian government had refused to allow its diplomats to be interrogated, had refused to waive diplomatic immunity, the RCMP had moved to make public the information in order to reduce the threat to a number of Canadians. The RCMP and other police forces have already warned somewhere in the region of 11 or 12, 13 Canadians about threats to the security of their lives as a consequence of the investigations that the RCMPs have carried out.
But Mr. Elcock, you seriously think that the Canadian police, if they had evidence, not intel, but evidence that can stand test in a court of law, which directly links diplomats, not just folks of the secret services or not folks of the intelligence services, but diplomats, to this kind of espionage that the RCMP is talking about, that wouldn't have been made public or produced in a court of law already?
The Crown Prosecutor is not going to launch a prosecution or lay charges without sufficient evidence that that's the case. But, and in this case, the Crown Prosecutor, they have proceeded with charges. The trial has not yet gone ahead. I can see the point, but that's neither here nor there. Trials don't necessarily go ahead immediately. This is going to be a complicated trial. It's going to take a fair while. It's got 4 defendants. There may be others as well. So it's going to be complex. So those things don't proceed overnight.
But that is the basis on which both countries have been expelling each other's diplomats.
The Canadian government expelled the Indian diplomats on the basis that the Indian government had refused to waive their diplomatic immunity. Given the evidence that I assume the government had at that time, the government had no choice the Indian government having refused to waive immunity, but to expel the diplomats. They were no longer acceptable in Canada.
Well, that was because the said Indian diplomats were being added by the Canadian police as persons of interest in a murder investigation. Why would any country agree to that?
Persons of interest can cover a multitude of sins. If they had enough information that they wanted to talk to them, whether they have enough information to provide clear links in the trial, time will tell. But they clearly had enough information to want to talk to the individuals in question. The fact that the Indian government refused to waive diplomatic immunity and allow the RCMP to talk to the individuals made it inevitable that they would be expelled.
All right, final question. Let me turn the tables and ask you, if Canadian diplomats were accused here in India of, let's say, being persons of interest in a murder investigation, and the Indian government asked the Canadian government to waive off their diplomatic immunity, you think they would do that?
I haven't the foggiest idea. I don't know. There would be a lot of pressure on the Canadian government to allow it if there were any indication that a Canadian had been involved. So it's impossible to tell ahead of time. But it is a hypothetical question that who knows.
All right, Mr. Ward Elcock.
Depends on the circumstances.
Mr. Ward Elcock, the head of the former head of Canadian Intelligence Services. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18.